football hosts Illinois Saturday at noon at SHI Stadium, airing live on Peacock. Obviously, a huge game for this program. 6-4 coming in, 3-4 in the Big Ten, hosting number 24 Illinois, 7-3 overall, 4-3 in the Big Ten. A lot of dragons can be slayed in this game for Rutgers football. David Anderson back, second time this week. David, initially, just what are some things that jump out to you about this matchup and keys for Rutgers if they are going to get this big victory in this season?
Sure. Watching Illinois this year, they've lost 3 games, 2 of which were to the Big Four and the Big Ten, so we know what that's like. And then their other loss was, a weird game against Minnesota that seemed more like a hangover from getting smacked around by Oregon the week before, which we also know a lot about, where sometimes your team's just beat up coming off of those losses. So in every other game, they have won. The only one that kind of sticks out is their, let's say, defensive clunker was against Purdue, who, playing with a backup quarterback and being the worst team in the conference, took them to overtime, and it was a failed 2-point conversion in overtime that allowed Illinois to escape, luckily, with a 50-49 victory after holding a 27-3 lead and holding a 2-touchdown lead with like 6 minutes left in that game. So really, I mean, what does that tell you? That tells you that they execute well and that you're going to have to be prepared. They're going to capitalize on mistakes that you make. And then ultimately it comes down to, if you can control the line of scrimmage, like Oregon and Penn State did, you're going to have a good chance. If you can't, you might get steamrolled. So really where I'm focusing on in this game is who controls the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, which comes as no surprise. A former Big Ten West team playing against Rutgers, a wannabe Big Ten West team. So that's really where I'm mainly going to be focused on in this game.
Yeah, great points there. And obviously, stylistically, coaching philosophy-wise, Brett Bielema, Greg Schiano are pretty similar in terms of how they want to play, how they want to win football games. In terms of the Illinois offense, obviously Luke Altmaier, he's been extremely efficient this year, while not putting up huge numbers. You look at passing yards per game, they're pretty much the same, Rutgers and Illinois, but he's been a lot more accurate in terms of his passing. And in terms of taking care of the football, 18 touchdown passes, 3 interceptions. What do you think the key is for the Rutgers defense in terms of containing Altmaier's production?
Well, I think the key is actually, if you can get pressure and force them to keep their tight end Arkin into block. He's a pretty versatile guy. I know he only had, I think, 3 catches for 17 yards last week, but he was a key guy in that win they had against Michigan, which was the one game where they didn't necessarily dominate in the line play and still won, but Michigan coughed it up twice inside their own territory, and then they also capitalized on a fake punt Illinois did. It was a 4th and 7, and Arkin, again, the tight end, he took the snap on the punt and then ran it for a long gain. I mean, 30, 40 yards type of thing. He wasn't even touched for probably the first 25. And so he's the guy who, if you can force him to stay into block and don't give him an easy free release, that could be a key factor. The other thing that would concern me is if the Rutgers defense can't contain the Illinois run game, because they're really, like you said, predicated more on their pass game. But they do go with 3 running backs. Number 6, I think it's McCray, is the one who concerns me the most, because he reminds me a little bit of Coleman from Washington, who we know gave Rutgers a lot of problems in that game. He's big, and you have to tackle him before he gets ahead of steam. If he gets ahead of steam, he'll fall forward for like 5 yards. But if you can get him before he gets going, knock him off his balance, force him to cut side to side rather than just bulldoze you, those are kind of the bigger things I'm looking at on the Rutgers defensive side, because, yeah, Illinois has good receivers, but we've kind of talked about this a lot over the last 2 years. Rutgers has faced good receivers the last few weeks. They faced 2 good ones last week. They faced Daniel Jackson, who's a good one the week before. They faced tons of good receivers the weeks before that. So I think Rutgers isn't going to be blown away by the skill of the Illinois receiver. That doesn't mean they're not going to give up a few big plays. That doesn't mean they're not going to make a play on them. But I do think that the X factor to me is more, if you can make Illinois one-dimensional and not let them kill you in the ground or just with, like, quick dump offs to the tight end, then they should have a good chance to win this game.
So specifically about Altmaier, uh, in terms of what you think he's going to be able to hurt Rutgers in that short passing game, in terms of efficiency, I mean, do you think we'll see anything different out of Illinois this week that we haven't seen from the way they've approached things so far, or are you expecting a different approach from Harris-Simiak and the Rutgers defense, and maybe something that Illinois hasn't seen yet this season?
It's a good question. I think Altmaier specifically, I was very impressed by him last year when he had very little protection and was running for his life. So he demonstrated last year an ability to complete passes from outside the pocket. But I've been more impressed by his ability to stay in the pocket and make throws this year. I think you're going to get a little bit of the same thing from we saw against Minnesota and Maryland, where you want to keep him in the pocket. But I do think he has a little bit more skill than Edwards and Brosmer from inside the pocket. I think he can make a few more throws than them. What really the challenge is for Joe Harris-Simiak and the Rutgers defense is Illinois does a better job even than Minnesota in disguising what they want to do. They'll bring a tight end into the backfield, but they'll run the same exact play that they would run if the tight end was flexed out a little bit or on the line of scrimmage. So they do a very good job of making it hard for you and testing your eyes. The other thing that they'll do that I really like is they remind me very much of a Craig Versteeg Rutgers offense, where they'll have a couple plays a game where you have not seen this on film at all, whether it be a reverse, whether it be a running back goes in motion, like a shuffle pass, and they won't use those plays again. So I do think that defensively, Rutgers is going to have to be even more disciplined than they've been the last 2 weeks, but you've got to get pressure. And, I think the Illinois line, though it's better than last year, it's not as strong as it has been in some of the previous iterations, even some of those poor, pathetic games we saw between Rutgers and Illinois during the Ash era. Those Illinois offensive lines, some of them were better than they had now. It was that the rest of their team wasn't there. So they are a little bit vulnerable up front. And so you've got to push them hard. And the biggest thing I'll say about this is one of the things I noticed about Rutgers' defensive line, when you're a defensive lineman, right, your job is to disrupt the play, but not lose gap integrity. But you can get into a habit of kind of like just kind of sitting down, like where you need to be, but be a little bit flat-footed. And one of the things that Rutgers has done the last 2 weeks that surprised all of us is they have kind of taken the blow to the offensive lineman. Like they've been the one initiating the contact, and then they've been maintaining their gap assignment, whether it be a pass rush or in run support. And you're going to have to really do that in this game, because if you let Illinois kind of flow with you to get their zone blocking scheme, they'll get yards. But if you can kind of blow plays up and shove linemen backwards, I mean, there's been a couple times where their linemen have been shoved right backwards into Altmaier, and he's committed turnovers. So, like, that's the type of thing you got to do. You got to make him rush his throws, because he can make a lot of reads. But if you can disrupt the timing of the pass game and the run game, you're going to have a lot of success. But they're going to do a lot of things to make you not do that by putting guys in motion and really trying to mess with your gap discipline.
I think that has been key the last 2 weeks to Rutgers' resurgence. Is the defensive line has really been a lot better just in terms of being disruptive and being able to create more chaos for the opposing quarterback, and in terms of what they're trying to do. Illinois, big-time receiver Pat Bryant, 6'3", had a huge game against Michigan State last week, averages almost 17 yards of reception. What do you think Rutgers' game plan is with him?
My concern is more what Illinois' game plan is with him, because one of the things that their offensive coordinator, I think it's Lunny, who, if I'm remembering right, he was the quarterback for Arkansas when I first started watching football, college football, is that they have a pretty good idea of what Rutgers is going to run on defense. And I think they're going to do a better job than the two previous opponents at isolating the matchup. One thing Maryland did not do well enough was isolate certain guys. At best, they would get a wide receiver against Shaquan Loyal, who's one of Rutgers' faster safeties. But do expect that Illinois is going to get their two good receivers matched up against Flip Dixon, who's going to have to come through, or linebacker, or crossing route traffic. And so those things are just hard to adjust for. The only thing you can really do is you can blitz or show certain looks and force them into audibles to get out of the play they want to run. But I mean, I think it's going to have to be you're going to have to win those one-on-one matchups, and the guys who may be not as fast on the Rutgers defense are going to have to hold up, or else this could be a long day. Because I have a lot of confidence that Illinois is going to find matchups that they want to exploit better than the previous two opponents.
Yeah, good point there. Anything else in terms of the matchup with the Illinois offense versus the Rutgers defense?
Just that you got to be careful if you're going to run stunting or slanting, because sometimes that'll go right into their hands and be a big play. I think it's going to be a tough to balance whether you go straight up or blitz, but I think you're going to have to blitz some just to keep them off balance and keep their play caller from just doing whatever he wants. That's probably the toughest cat and mouse game we'll see here is between Harasimiak and Lunny, with who's trying to dictate to the other side what they're doing. But if Rutgers can control the line of scrimmage, then they're going to have a huge advantage and more tools at their disposal on that side of the ball.
And on the flip side, the Rutgers offense obviously shown a lot more ability to throw the ball down the field against Maryland. Overall, Kaliakmanis has been steadily improving. The last 4 weeks has been more accurate. There was that article that came out, or that stat on Twitter this week, that he's the victim of the 11th most lost yards due to drops by his receivers. But overall, he's been a lot more accurate lately. Just 2 interceptions over the last 4 games, 6 touchdown passes. He's thrown for close to, or he's averaging over 250 yards a game right now, throwing the football. How much do you think that Rutgers is going to continue that approach, or do you think it's going to be more of ball control, try to establish a run and keep that run going now that Monangai was back after last week?
I would hesitate to go away from it too much, because really what made this Rutgers offense work the last 2 weeks was Ethan Kaliakmanis' abilities. I hope that Rutgers benefits from yet another team underestimating Kaliakmanis because they played against him last year or saw him last year and will come into this game a little overconfident. Actually, that's a pretty big factor in this game, is whichever one of these teams comes in too overconfident is probably going to fall down early, because both of them are kind of feeling pretty good about what they did last week. So that being said, you got to try to wear this Illinois front down on the ground. Their weakness is the run defense. In pass defense, they will give you short passes, especially on the perimeter. And this is why it reminds me very much of a Schiano 1.0 defense, because they are a little bit vulnerable to quarterback running, but they also rely on the fact that they're not getting bulldozed at the point of attack. So as long as they can hold up, they're going to be okay. They don't expect that they're going to, just shove your offensive line back, but they also don't expect to get pushed back either. And so you've got to wear them down to start getting build those holes in the line from like wearing them down over the course of the game. So you can't go away from the run game too much. And then also in the pass game, there are certain plays you're going to want to, like we talked about last year, run block, even though it's a pass play. So whether you're checking to an audible or like a quick throw on the pass play, stuff like that, those can be effective. But you can't just drop back and pass, drop back and pass, drop back and pass. Akis, the defensive end, is a beast. This guy is going to be presenting a lot of problems. I don't expect him going against Holland Pierce very much, because they're going to move him around. They're going to try to take advantage of Rutgers' second string linemen, especially right tackle Taj White getting meaningful action again, probably at right tackle. They're going to try to move him around, and if he's not having success in one spot, they'll move him somewhere else. And so you've got to wear down him and the rest of their front. They also have a pretty good defensive tackle whose name's escaping me. You got to make them work in the run game. And then the other thing is, if they're going to give you those passing yardage, especially to the outside on first down, sometimes you'll see press coverage, but then they'll bail. And so if you have a good play action or your receiver runs a tight route, you can just throw it to the outside for 6 yards and then move on to second down. So I don't think you want to just totally run in those situations, but you're going to have to take the yards that they give you, because if you try to force the action, just like a Greg Schiano 1.0 team, they're going to make you pay for it. If you try to force plays that aren't there, they're not going to work. And so I think, again, the key on this side of the ball, same thing. Rutgers has to control the line of scrimmage, and then they have to have a steady diet of run plays, even if the pass is working, to ensure that they're wearing down the Illinois defensive front. The Illinois defensive backs are young. I think they're going to be good next year. This year is kind of a period of transition, so you will see them miss the coverage at times. You will see them make the wrong read at times. But if you're just dropping back and passing, I think they're going to get more and more comfortable. So you've got to make them have to be ready for run and pass for it to work.
Yeah, and I think in this type of game, Rutgers, Illinois, who establishes, the physicality in this game, I think that's why you'll see Munungai get a lot of carries in that first quarter. Rutgers try to establish the run and really kind of control the clock. They're leading the Big Ten in time of possession. Illinois is towards the back end. Not that there's a great disparity in terms of time itself. It's about 2.5 minute difference, but overall, Rutgers, is certainly, I think, going to try to control the clock as much as possible in this game. I wanted to ask you, Munungai looked like his old self last week, maybe a little bit less effective at times, but had that big run that didn't count. Were you surprised at all that Jashawn Benjamin did not get any carries in that game? Antoine Raymond getting 4, Munungai getting the rest. And do you think that maybe that could be a surprise element this week against Illinois?
Well, like I said in Monday's recap, I think the Benjamin package was just not needed. I think that they were passing the ball well, and they obviously trust Raymond and Munungai more in pass protection, and they were running fine. But I do think if they need a changeup, I do expect Benjamin to play in this game. And it's a good question, too, because if you look at the Purdue game, you're like, how did the worst team in the conference put up 49 points in basically 2.5 quarters? Because they were down 27-3, right? So they pretty much put it up in the second half and overtime and a little bit at the end of the second quarter. And it was getting speedier guys to the perimeter. One of the things, again, when we talk about the Rutgers 1.0 era defensively, was that if they didn't have a speed advantage, they sometimes would be vulnerable. And we saw this a couple times against Cincinnati, South Florida, etc. And Illinois is the same type of way. They don't expect that one guy is going to be able to beat them. But if there is one guy who's kind of shifty and fast, that is where they're vulnerable. So you might even not only see Benjamin in this game, you might see Ben Black get a look at times, because they're not going to be as burned by the big physical receivers like Duff and Strong as previous opponents. That's not to say they're not going to get catches, but the way to get the yards against Illinois is to get their speedier guys in space, especially if it's a jet sweep or something to the outside. So when Munungai is going good, he can be that guy for you. But if he's a little tired or banged up or it's ineffective, you're going to have to find another way to stretch them horizontally. And that's not something Rutgers had to do last week against Maryland, but it is something that they're going to have to do this week probably to win this game. And so I do expect, sure, if Rutgers wins 31-17, we might not see Benjamin, but if this game's tight, they're going to have to go to it at some point just to offer the change of pace and get one of their quicker guys an opportunity to make guys miss and then disrupt those pursuit angles. Because like we talked about against Maryland, if you just let them flow to the ball and run support, they'll stop you. But one good cutback, or if you can make one or two guys miss, there's not a second guy in that lane because they have good discipline. And that's the same thing with Illinois. So I think, again, healthy, freshman Munungai is obviously your best bet. But if he's not in there, then I think they might have to go to Benjamin in this game, even though they got through last week without even having to do it.
Yeah, and I think that in a way, looking back on it, maybe it takes them off the radar a little bit in terms of Illinois' prep and what they might expect, being that was his only appearance this season so far 2 weeks ago against Minnesota, but a more similar-minded type team in Illinois as well. Just in terms of red zone execution, Rutgers was excellent, obviously, against Maryland on both sides of the ball. Overall this season, they're converting 2/3 of their attempts now in the red zone for touchdowns. Illinois is a little bit worse than that. They're more successful overall. They have a really good field goal kicker in David Alano, 15 of 18. They've kicked a lot of short field goals out of that red zone. I guess in terms of any edge you're seeing or think that these two teams have from a special teams perspective, or just in terms of the keys in the red zone, maybe something Illinois is doing differently that Rutgers has, and the key, I guess, to the pass game with Cal Manis and why they've been more effective in the red zone?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if we're talking overall intangibles, if we talk pure special teams first, I think Illinois has a slight edge on specials. I think on the Night Report podcast, Richie and Mike's guest was talking about how Illinois has an accurate kicker, but he's not like a booming leg kicker. He's kind of a younger guy, but he's good. They also have a returner who I think is the best returner in the Big Ten if he has enough returns to qualify. And so I think eighth nationally, somebody was saying on one of the podcasts. And so I do think Illinois has an advantage in special teams. I also think they execute their special teams well. So this is one of the few times Rutgers is going to be at a disadvantage on special teams and needs to more just like hold serve. In terms of red zone execution, one of the things that kind of annoys me about red zone execution statistics is, you know how we always talk about that statistic you see all the time, like when this team runs the ball more than their opponent, they win like 75, 80% of the time. It's like, well, no, man, because it's like when you're winning, you run the ball more. When you're losing, you pass the ball. And that statistic is the dumbest statistic in all of college and NFL, because it's like, obviously the team that runs the ball more probably is going to win, especially when you count all the, kneel downs and all these sorts of things, right? So it's very silly. Red zone execution is not quite that silly, but at times you can be a little bit misguided, because like we look at that game against Maryland last week, I told you, if Rutgers was only up 10, some of those failed fourth down attempts in the red zone that will go down as not converting in the red zone would have just been field goal tries that may have been made. Similarly for Rutgers, why did they fail so many times in the red zone against USC? Because they had to go for it. And so I think it's a little more of a product of like, are you winning or not? Assuming you can get the ball to the red zone. Obviously, we saw Rutgers offenses under Chris Schaff not even get to the red zone, right? But assuming your team can move the ball at all, I think that's an area where the stats might be a little overblown. So what do I think about it? Well, to be a good red zone team, you have to run the ball effectively. And that's where Illinois does a great job of getting a lot of play action, either to their tight end or a back out of the backfield, or sucking the defense in and then throwing it to a receiver. So I think Illinois is better in the red zone than even their stats might indicate, because I think they do a lot of things well, all the things you need to do in the red zone. The quarterback can run a little bit even better than Rutgers. And so I would give Illinois a slight edge in special teams as well as red zone. And so that's why I think if Rutgers is going to win, they got to control the line of scrimmage and or win the turnover battle, because I would give Illinois a slight edge in these other two areas. Now, that's not to say I think Rutgers' defensive line has taken tremendous strides. I mean, we talk about all these guys. Griffin, Ray, Rainey, Hamilton, all these guys at the beginning of the year were like, we thought they were going to be fine, but, it hasn't been until now that we really feel like they're stopping the run enough. But even then, Maryland abandoned the run way too early. I mean, Hemby was running pretty well against this defensive front, and I don't think Illinois is going to make that same mistake, even though they're more of a passing team, especially when they get down the goal line. I think they might give it to McCray and try to have him battle over a few people if they've watched that Washington tape at all.
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously much better coached. And in terms of you're talking about the returner for Illinois, it's Hank Beatty. It's punt returns specifically. He's leading the Big Ten with a 13.8 yards average on 16 returns. There are four other guys in the Big Ten that average 12.9 yards per return, so slightly better. I don't know where that puts him nationally, but yes, he's a threat. He has a 37-yard long return this year. No touchdown returns yet, but pretty consistent. And obviously, even the several yards he can gain on punt returns could be the difference just in terms of field position and all that. Any I guess, closing thoughts or X factors in this game that you're looking for Rutgers, Illinois?
Like we talked, I guess it comes down to who do I think is going to be more ready for this game, not overconfident coming off the last week's results. I think obviously neither team needs to completely dominate on the lines of scrimmage to win, but if you're getting steamrolled, you're going to have trouble. And then I'm hoping that Ethan Kelly-McManus can play as well as Altmaier. I think that the Illinois bloggers are definitely discounting Ethan. They're not paying attention to what he did the past 2 weeks. I'm not sure if their coaching staff will make the same mistake, but I feel like there's a lot of little things here that Rutgers may have a slight advantage. I also think Rutgers is a little bit – I honestly think Rutgers is a higher-end team than Illinois. And I know Illinois has one more win, and I do think in a dogfight, Illinois might have a slight edge here compared to some other previous games where we thought if it was close late, Rutgers would have an edge. I think Illinois is a little better execution, especially because I think they have a little bit more experience at certain positions than Rutgers does. So this is not a game to play to win by 2, because I think in a tight game, I'd give an edge to Illinois because of, again, special teams and tangibles. I think their coaching staff is on par with Rutgers. I don't think Rutgers has a coaching edge. Whereas if one team wins by 10, I think it would be more likely that it's Rutgers. So going into this game, I mean, this is between a 45 and 55% victory. Basically, we can predict your score. Everyone on all the podcasts has pretty much been +3, -3, one way or the other, maybe 6 here or there. But I do think, Rutgers, if they play their best, they will win. If they play not good, they will lose. Whereas I think Illinois, their range is a little more narrow. And I think in a tight game, I would give them a slight edge. So that's my general closing thoughts on this game, which we'll say, when's the last time, if ever, Rutgers has been in a big game for conference standings purposes late in the season? Never. I mean,
Right.
the outcome of this game could swing bowl destinations for half the conference, depending on what happens in this game. And so there's actually a lot riding on this game. This is like an actual big game late in the season that we haven't seen in quite some time.
Right. Well, and that's what I wanted to end on in terms of the emotions of this game, maybe being an X factor variable here. Not only standings implications, but the fact that Rutgers can finally slay the ranked Dragon 15-year drought, 40-game losing streak against ranked opponents, and to have the opportunity to do so on senior day with this senior class, with all they've done for the program, the resurrection of the last 2 seasons, this year included now, getting back to bowl eligibility when things seemed bleak just 2.5, 3 weeks ago. It just seems poetic. Maybe the college football gods are putting it on the table for them, and they've earned it, and now they just have to walk through that door. So, and then also the fact they've never won 4 Big Ten games in a season. They would have then setting up the stage for the following week to win 8 games, to have a Big Ten winning record for the first time ever. We've talked about momentum so much in this season, both ways, how important it's been for this team specifically. And this is just another example. If they can keep things going, I feel like if it's close late, this team's going to have a lot of confidence. The defense has come through big time in the fourth quarter the last 2 weeks. I guess that was maybe late third quarter, that interception. I can't remember exactly, but just making something out of nothing that's gotten the offense to then take advantage of it. That's how close this game is going to be. If they can do that one more time, it probably is going to be the difference. But I think just the vibe of this team right now going into it, and obviously the last home game, I think how the seniors manage their emotions, especially in the beginning. You don't want to fall down 10-0 early and have to grind it out against a team this tough. So I think, we're looking for physicality, just aggressiveness, but also obviously who can take advantage of each other's mistakes. But for you personally, just last thought, just in terms of not only the standings, but just ranking. I mean, perception wise, I just think for this program, it would be so great to see this class leave a kind of a statement victory in their last home game, and also change some perception for the program to get this monkey off the back, to move them forward I think if they win this game, no matter what happens the rest of the way, in terms of the last week, they've made progress, right? We talked about it 2 weeks ago. That you don't want to see, you can't slide back. You don't want to see equal progress, but at least here, if they win a 7th game, if they win a 4th Big Ten game, if they beat a ranked team like that, that's legitimate. That's tangible stuff we can point to and say they made progress this year. Whether it's enough progress or as much as everyone thought they should make, you can't argue with the fact it would be progress.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I was saying, this is a big game in conference. It's being talked about on the networks, on, pretty much every podcast and everything like that. Illinois is a name. Illinois is having a good season, right? They're not a name like Michigan or USC or anything, but they are a program that has more historical success, right? So when they have a good season, people talk about it. So I think that does matter. I wouldn't call this, again, a must win. The one thing I will add that I forgot to mention, we've talked all season about how Rutgers was at a significant talent disadvantage on paper than pretty much everyone they played. But when you look at the bottom of the Big Ten, the one team that they actually have more, if you add up all the star ratings and all that, the one team they have more than is Illinois. So this is one of the few times that they're kind of coaching will matter a lot in this game, as well as development of the players that are on the roster. And so that's going to be a big thing to watch. But to your point, you win this game and you're a story in the Big Ten this year. You lose this game, people might be like, well, that was nice that they won 2 games, but it will matter less outside than those of us who are like, wow, the train is falling off the tracks. I think people will be like, Rutgers. But if you win this game, then yes, the perception in the conference and nationally will be of, hey, maybe they are putting something together there. If you lose, it's like, well, I think it's more like apathy from people around the conference. But if you win, then it will make an impact. And I know I talked about it preseason. Getting to the 4th conference win is critical at this point to having a successful season, because you got to at least get one step further than you've ever gotten in conference. So I know the schedule's been easier, but to me, that's the ranked streak, whatever, where you are in the standings, whatever. To me, the 4th conference win is the biggest one, big picture takeaway out of this.
Yeah, because it can lead to a winning record in Big Ten play. If you go 5-4 in the Big Ten,
right?
That's it. That's a huge thing for the program. So with an easier schedule, with on paper what we thought was the best team in some time, if they can do that and get that 8-win mark in the regular season, I mean, they hit. I look at it as they hit their stride. They didn't exceed expectations, but I think they would hit exactly what we had hoped they would. And that would be huge with all the adversity they've gone through. So this would just be such a huge victory for this program. Thank you so much for your breakdown and preview of this game. We'll obviously be back next week to discuss it, and I'll be back after the game for rapid reaction. But Rutgers, Illinois, noon on Peacock. Get your streaming network going, and should be a tight game and big game for both programs in terms of the trajectory of their seasons. Thanks so much for listening and watching once again here at the Scarlet Faithful podcast.